Some sad news now from the Spotlight family as our former weather presenter and friend Craig Rich has died at the age of 86 after what his family have today described as an amazing life. Craig's wife Pat and their 3 children say he died peacefully and that it's now time to celebrate his remarkable life. Johnny Rutherford reports.
Craig Rich, please! Oh, yes.
Oh, Mark.
You like this adulation, don't you?
Well, look at the weather. You can't do better than this, can you, Mark?
Craig Rich was a star wherever he went, and even here at the Radio 1 Roadshow. He was the BBC's first regional weather forecaster, and he broadcast for a quarter of a century. In January this year, he spoke to us about his career.
It was a pure fluke. I was interviewed by Hugh Scully. Of course, they had Graham Danton doing the weather for the other side. And he said, you'd be ideal, because he looked at my CV, to do the weather for us. And that was it.
I saw him just last week, and he reminded me, I'd forgotten, that he and I actually started at Spotlight on the same day. It was his part-time job, because he was a master mariner, of course, still teaching in Plymouth. But we learnt on the job. He was just such fun to work with, and we sort of formed a family. How about a sunny outlook for Craig?
Sunny outlook.
He was always game for a laugh, but could also cover serious topics on outside broadcasts. He presented many other programmes, including local BBC radio.
And is probably the most visited war memorial on the First World War's Western Front.
One of his proudest Spotlight OBs was interviewing Her Royal Highness Princess Anne.
About the combination of the sea and these sort of historic vessels.
After claiming the 243-mile record for a day...
Craig also uncovered the mystery of Donald Crowhurst's claim to sail round the world in the Times Golden Globe race.
The Sunday Times, I think it was, gave Craig the logbooks. Craig, being a master mariner, took one look at these logbooks and said, this man hasn't been around the world at all. It's a fraud. He's never actually left the Atlantic Ocean.
That's the high pressure, all right, but it's clear skies. But
it's BBC Spotlight weather forecasting that most people will remember him for.
Craig was a really special person, one of a kind, a legend. I mean, I felt so lucky to work with him for so many years, but even luckier to count him as a friend. We carried on meeting up for lunch once a year after we both left the programme, and Craig would light the room up. He was a warm and wonderful guy, and as I say, I felt really lucky to have him as a friend.
He had a twinkle in his eye and an almost boyish love of telling jokes. He brightened the day no end, and he lifted the mood in the studio, and he was just the most warm, joyous person to be around.
Every weekend, most evenings, he was out opening fairs, doing this, that and the other, raising a huge amount of money for local charities, all unsung, never made a big issue of it. It was just his kind-hearted nature.
Proper legend.
Proper legend. He really was a legend.
I had a brilliant time. I loved it, every minute of it. Some wonderful people to work with. And it went like lightning. And, you know, I look back on it and think that was a really, really happy time.
The joyous Craig Rich, who's died at the age of 86. He really was. He was fun, wasn't he, David? You remember him very well.
He was a larger-than-life character. I think Teresa hit the nail on the head when she said he would walk into the room and it would just light up. He used to come into the newsroom and you knew it was Craig because you could hear him from way down the corridor. He had that lovely booming voice. Very generous to me, looked after me when I first arrived here. And he kind of set the benchmark for regional weather forecasting, both in what we talk about, giving that local detail, thinking about the listener and the viewer, making sure they were kept informed. But he was also a real professional because he could talk about complex meteorological stuff, but at the same time he could then go and raise money down in Lou for the RNLI, talk to tourists. And I suppose my memories of him was that he was absolutely no different in the weather studio than he was down the pub an hour or so later. He was Craig, and we'll miss him.
Yeah, absolutely.